Candace Owens, like, listen, is this the same person who yesterday was in tears because Bud Light put a rainbow on their can? And she wants to portray herself now as some brave culture warrior fighting against suffering children. I mean, it's disgraceful. And the fact is, she is not in the presence of the violence this rhetoric creates.
Which brings me to the greatest civil rights violation of our time, which is taking place right now. And that is transgenderism. And I'm going to make a very strong statement right now, and I mean it. It is worse than Jim Crow laws because we are mutilating the bodies of children. How could you not see that as something worse? You segregated white people versus black people, you wouldn't be harming children, and we are doing that.
Yeah. Candace Owens really just said that Jim Crow laws enforced segregation. They don't even compare to the modern transgender movement. And her entire argument in comparison is just so blatantly stupid and false. But this reply to the clip that Jason Campbell posted on Twitter totally destroys the basis for her argument. So let's pull this reply up. This person said, to separate solely based on their race generates a feeling of inferiority as to their status to the community that may affect their hearts and minds in a way unlike ever to be undone. That was Chief Justice Earl Warren in the Brown v. Board of Education decision from 1954. And like was mentioned in that quote, the decision heavily focused on the detrimental impacts of segregation on children, although Candace Owens would have you believe that segregation wasn't harmful to children. And I hate to break it to you, Candace, but segregation is even harming children right now. According to urban.org, children who grew up in more racially segregated metropolitan areas experience less economic mobility than those in less segregated ones. And more racially and economically segregated regions tend to have lower incomes and educational attainment and higher homicide rates. But, Candace never let facts stand in the way of her stupid argument. So let's listen to a little bit more of it.
The same usual suspects are supporting it, the mainstream media. Look around you. New York Times, the Washington Post, they're fostering this delusion. They're saying it's compassionate to allow your child to pick their gender. The science is in, guys. It's totally fine to allow children to take drugs that chemically castrate them, that render them infertile for the rest of their lives. It's good for their mental psyche. There are all sorts of doctors and people with PhDs that are writing this. In fact, doctors and surgeons are performing these procedures to mutilate the bodies of our most vulnerable. We are talking about something that is borderline Frankenstein. It is Frankenstein. These are human experiments that are being performed on children.
I was just going to say, Candace, it's not access to gender affirming care that's harming these children. In fact, in a lot of instances, it's saving their lives. But what might harm them is calling them Frankensteins. I think that would be more harmful to them than having their gender affirmed and taking away access to that care. That's what's hurting them. According to reporting from CNN, major medical associations say that gender affirming care is clinically appropriate for children and adults with gender dysphoria, which is a psychological distress that may result when a person's gender identity and sex assigned at birth do not align, according to the American Psychiatric Association. More than 50% of transgender and non-binary youth in states across the US seriously considered suicide in the past year, according to a new survey data on a worsening LGBTQ plus youth mental health crisis. The Trevor Project, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to LGBTQ plus youth suicide prevention, released state level data from nearly 34,000 queer and trans youth ages 13 to 24, showing alarmingly high rates of suicide attempts, depression, and anxiety across liberal and conservative regions. So just don't fall victim to the framing from the right wing of this issue. They do not care about protecting the children. If they cared about protecting the children, then they would actually care about protecting gender affirming care, which is shown to decrease instances of suicide in trans and non-binary youth. That's not their agenda, is to protect children. It's just a bigoted agenda against trans people and to enforce their Christo-fascist ideology onto everyone in this country.
These people will not stop until trans people are terrified, that they don't feel like they belong here, that they are attacked in the street, And in their less guarded moments, they've made that really clear in the things that they've said. And the fact is, a lot of these things are being turned into law in states like Indiana and in Idaho. And it's creating a reality where these trans advocates have no advocates of their own. Like, we have a party that is terrified to make social issues into an issue for 2024. And we do that at the cost of these people who now feel they've been used as props and that they are voiceless. And it is a disgraceful thing that she's doing here. And you wish you could say she's better than that, but we know that she is not.
Yeah, absolutely not. And to that point, that the Democratic Party really needs to step up and actually do something for trans people and attempt to protect trans rights, especially with the onslaught of bills to restrict lives of trans people. 150 bills, 150 of them were filed in state legislatures last year. And now they are becoming law. They are getting passed and becoming law. Take a look at this headline from CNN. Indiana and Idaho enact bans on gender affirming care for transgender youth. You know what gender affirming care includes? Letting them dress as the gender they identify as, or using that name or using those pronouns. That's included in gender affirming care, which is getting banned. But let's continue on and look at more in depth what else is getting banned in these state legislators. From CNN, the Indiana legislation, which takes effect July 1st, states that physicians or practitioners who provide minors with such care, which includes puberty blockers, hormone therapy, and surgery intended to help transition genders, will be subject to discipline by their regulatory board. Doctors who are following best practices guidelines are going to be subject to discipline for doing their jobs and following the guidelines and the standard of the American Psychiatric Association. But it continues on that under the Idaho law, which takes effect on January 1st, 2024, physicians or practitioners who provide gender affirming care, which includes puberty blockers as well as surgeries, could face a $5,000 fine and a felony charge. A felony for doing their job to the best of their ability and doing no harm. A felony. We also have this quote here from Brad Little, the governor of Idaho, who says, in signing this bill, I recognize our society plays a role in protecting minors from surgeries or treatment that can irreversibly damage their healthy bodies. However, as policymakers, we should take great caution whenever we consider allowing the government to interfere with loving parents and their decision about what is best for their children. But signed the bill, though. It signed the bill to do exactly that. And mind you, he's talking about protecting children's healthy bodies from these surgeries when most of these bills have explicit carve-outs so that cisgender kids can still have plastic surgeries. So a cisgender girl who's under 18 could still have a breast augmentation or get a nose job. No attempt to ban those types of plastic surgeries that are, purely aesthetic for cis kids, but just for trans kids. But they want you to believe that this is about protecting the healthy bodies of children from unnecessary surgeries. It's a ridiculous lie and it needs to be called out whenever it's seen.